6:14 a.m., June 3rd, 2026. Laveen, Arizona. 18 federal vehicles moved in a coordinated column down West Bassline Road, headlights off. The convoy split at the intersection of 67th Avenue without a radio call. The split had been rehearsed 4 times the previous week. Each driver wore an earpiece tuned to a dedicated tactical channel that stayed silent until the moment of entry. Total ransom extracted, $340,000. 9 children, 4 families, 5 months. The warehouse at 4812 West Dobbins Road had no visible signage. The building permit listed it as a construction supply storage facility. The business registration was filed in November 2024 under the name Pinnacle Materials LLC. The registered agent, a Phoenix accountant who had never visited the address. Agents from IRS Criminal Investigation and Homeland Security Investigations fanned out around the perimeter in 3 teams. Team 1 covered the loading dock on the south side. Team 2 moved toward the primary entry, a rolling steel door facing west. Team 3 held the rear access point, a single metal door with a padlock that surveillance had photographed 2 days prior. Each team carried a printed schematic of the building's exterior dimensions, annotated by hand during the previous evening's briefing. Inside that warehouse, behind a partition of freshly installed drywall, 9 children between the ages of 6 and 14 had been held for varying lengths of time. The youngest had been there for 4 months and 11 days. The agents didn't know exactly what they would find when the door opened. They knew the number. They knew the ages. They had reviewed the Zelle transfer records, the surveillance logs, the shell account registrations. They had mapped the pass-through account, identified 4 of the 5 suspects, and obtained a federal warrant signed at 11:47 p.m. the night before. What they could not prepare for was the condition of what was inside. This is not a story about a dramatic cartel takedown. No automatic weapons, no tunnels, no stash houses. This is a story about a spreadsheet, about a fraud detection algorithm nobody was watching, about a single IRS analyst in a Phoenix field office who pulled a data flag on a Tuesday afternoon in late April 2026 and recognized a pattern that the victims themselves had been too afraid to report. The cell had been operating since 2024. By the time federal agents reached that warehouse in Laveen, they had collected $340,000 from 4 families and held 9 children in controlled captivity, some for more than 130 days. They had moved money through Zelle with such frequency and across so many rotating accounts that no single transaction ever crossed the wire reporting threshold. They had selected their targets with calculation. And for 5 months, they were right about one thing. Not a single family had called the police. The algorithm caught what the victims couldn't report. Here's how it started. The Phoenix metropolitan area is one of the fastest growing construction markets in the American Southwest. In 2025, Maricopa County issued more residential building permits than any other county in the country for the 3rd consecutive year. Behind those permits, a workforce that is disproportionately first-generation immigrant, concentrated in communities where trust in law enforcement is complicated by documentation status, language barriers, and institutional history. That demographic profile was not incidental to what the ransom cell was building. It was the product. The first documented case in this operation involved a family identified in court records only as Family 1. The father, a construction crew foreman, had emigrated from Guatemala in 2018 and had been working in the Phoenix area since 2019. His wife worked in hospitality, morning shift at a hotel near the airport. They had 3 children. In January 2026, their 11-year-old did not come home from school. The call came 4 hours later. A burner number, a male voice, calm and specific. The child was safe. The child would remain safe as long as 2 conditions were met. No police contact, and payment instructions would follow within 24 hours. The note that arrived by text the following morning read, "We have eyes on your house. Do not call anyone. Payment begins tomorrow." The family did not call police. The father borrowed money from 2 brothers and a cousin. The first Zelle transfer, $8,500, went out on January 9th, 2026, to a mobile number registered to a prepaid account in the name of a person who did not exist. Over the next 6 weeks, the family sent a total of $74,000 in installments ranging from $3,200 to $14,000. The child was returned on February 18th, 2026, dropped at a gas station on West McDowell Road, disoriented and dehydrated, with a single instruction delivered by phone. Don't talk about where you were. The family did not talk. The second case began in February 2026, the third in March, the fourth in early April. Each followed the same pattern with minor variations. Burner number. calm male voice, written warning about surveillance. Zelle transfers in installments. Total ransom per family, between $60,000 and $90,000. What the cell had not anticipated was that Zelle's internal compliance infrastructure had been quietly upgraded in late 2025. The upgrade included a clustering algorithm designed to flag non-obvious patterns. Multiple unrelated senders transferring to the same rotating set of recipient accounts over a compressed time window. The flag was not triggered by any single transfer. It was triggered by the aggregate. On April 22, 2026, a compliance packet was generated automatically and forwarded to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, standard routing. The packet contained 34 flag transactions across 11 sender accounts and 6 recipient accounts, all occurring between January 6th and April 19th, 2026. The packet sat in a FinCEN queue for 4 days. On April 26th, 2026, IRS Criminal Investigation Special Agent Denise Okafor, assigned to the Phoenix Field Office's Financial Fraud Unit, opened it. One detail in the case reconstruction documents kept pulling my attention back. The Zelle compliance flag was not generated by a human analyst noticing something unusual. It was generated by software executing a pattern recognition subroutine updated in a quarterly release. No one was specifically looking for this. The algorithm found it because that is what it was built to do, and it almost didn't get routed to someone who could act on it. Okafor had been assigned to financial fraud investigations for 6 years. Before Phoenix, she had worked out of the Chicago field office on EBT fraud networks and structured cash schemes. She was not working a kidnapping case. She was not working anything connected to missing persons. She was reviewing a compliance packet flagged for unusual Zelle transfer clustering, which was her assignment queue for that week. The first thing she noticed: 6 of the 11 sender accounts showed no prior history of high-frequency transfers. The transactions were uncharacteristically large for the account profiles. The second thing she noticed: 3 of the 6 recipient accounts had appeared in a separate FinCEN report from February 2026, a report generated by HSI in connection with a human smuggling network operating along the I-10 corridor. That connection was not in the Zelle packet. Okafor found it by cross-referencing manually, using a database query that took her approximately 40 minutes to construct. She flagged the overlap to her supervisor at 3:47 p.m. on April 26, 2026. By 5 p.m., HSI Special Agent Carlos Rivas had been pulled into a conference call. The overlap between the Zelle recipient accounts and the HSI human smuggling watch list was not a coincidence. It was structural. The ransom cell was not a standalone criminal enterprise. It was connected, loosely but verifiably, to a broader network that moved undocumented workers across the border and into the Southwest labor market. The kidnapping operation was a secondary revenue stream. The selection of victims was deliberate. Families embedded in immigrant communities where law enforcement contact was perceived as an existential risk. The cell had done the math, and for 4 months, the math was correct. What's most surprising about this case isn't the sophistication of the financial routing. It's the simplicity of the victim selection logic. The perpetrators didn't need advanced surveillance capabilities or deep criminal infrastructure to identify targets. They were operating inside the same communities they were exploiting, and they understood exactly how fear of deportation functions as a silencing mechanism, even for documented residents whose legal status was never actually at risk. Here's what this tells us about the operational calculus of criminal exploitation in 2026. The most effective coercive tool is not violence. It is the credible threat of exposure to systems the victim has reason to fear. The ransom cell never needed to hurt anyone to maintain compliance. The threat was enough. By April 29th, 2026, IRS-CI and HSI had opened a joint investigation under the designation Phoenix Zelle. A task force was assembled within 48 hours. 4 IRS-CI agents, 3 HSI investigators, 2 analysts from FinCEN's Southwest Regional Office, and 1 assistant U.S. attorney from the District of Arizona assigned for warrant support. The immediate objective was to map the recipient account network. Of the 6 flagged recipient accounts, 2 had already been frozen by their respective banks following the February FinCEN report. The remaining 4 were active. The cell had been rotating recipient accounts every 2 to 3 weeks, closing old mobile payment registrations and opening new ones using prepaid phone numbers and synthetic identity credentials. The pattern was deliberate, but not perfect. Each new account required a registration anchor, a phone number, an email address, or a linked financial account. The cell had been using a single construction supply business account in Phoenix as a pass-through anchor for new registrations. The business: Pinnacle Materials LLC. The account: a small business checking account at a regional bank registered in November 2024. The account showed a pattern of small inbound deposits, $200, $350, $175, consistent with invoice payments, followed by rapid outbound transfers to mobile payment accounts. The account had never been flagged independently because no single transaction was large enough to trigger a report. Okafor requested the full account transaction history on April 30th. The bank produced records on May 2nd. On May 6th, agents conducted physical surveillance of the registered address for Pinnacle Materials LLC, a warehouse at 4812 West Dobbins Road in the Levine district of Phoenix. The surveillance team noted the following over a 72-hour observation period: irregular foot traffic at non-business hours, 2 vehicles registered to individuals with prior immigration enforcement contact, a pattern of deliveries that did not correspond to a functioning supply business, and the installation of what appeared to be interior drywall partitioning visible through a partially open loading dock door on the morning of May 8th. The drywall installation mattered. Pinnacle Materials LLC had filed a building modification permit for interior partition work in October 2025. Stated purpose: storage optimization. Agent Rivas reviewed the permit documentation on May 9th and flagged it to the task force. What was behind the newly installed drywall was not yet confirmed. But the combination of the Zelle account linkage, the pass-through structure, and the physical surveillance indicators was enough to begin building a warrant application. The application was filed on May 19th, 2026. It was denied on May 22nd. The initial warrant application was rejected by the reviewing magistrate on the grounds that the financial linkage between the Pinnacle Materials account and the flagged Zelle transfers was correlational rather than direct. The 3 recipient accounts linked to the HSI human smuggling watch list had not been definitively tied to Pinnacle Materials through a documented transaction chain, only through shared registration infrastructure inferred from metadata patterns. This was the obstacle that could have ended the investigation. The task force had 72 hours to either strengthen the financial documentation or find an alternative evidentiary path. Okafor spent those 72 hours reconstructing the account registration chain from the raw metadata in the Zelle compliance packet. She was looking for a direct transaction, a transfer from a flagged recipient account that could be traced back to the Pinnacle Materials checking account through one intermediary rather than 2. She found it at 11:20 p.m. on May 23rd. A $12,000 transfer on March 14th, 2026, from Zelle recipient account designated R4 in the task force documentation to a mobile payment account registered to a phone number that had been used to activate the Pinnacle Materials business checking account in November 2024. The linkage was a single registration anchor, the same prepaid phone number used for both purposes. It was not elegant. The cell had reused one phone number across 2 different infrastructure functions, probably because they were operating with limited registration resources. One reuse. One thread. Okafor documented the chain and filed a supplemental warrant application on May 24th. The revised warrant was approved on May 27th, 2026. At this point, the task force had confirmed the financial architecture. What they had not confirmed, because they could not confirm it without physical access, was whether any of the missing children were being held at the Levine warehouse. 9 children were still unaccounted for across the 4 families. Family 1's child had been returned. The remaining 9 had not. Families 2, 3, and 4 had continued making payments throughout April and into May. The last documented transfer from any of the 4 families was on May 29th, 2026, a $7,400 Zelle payment from Family 3 to a recipient account opened 4 days earlier. The children had been in captivity for varying lengths of time. The longest, 132 days as of June 1st, 2026. The task force faced a decision that the Assistant U.S. Attorney documented in the case file: move on the warehouse immediately or extend surveillance to develop fuller suspect identification. Extending surveillance created risk. If the cell became aware of the investigation through any of multiple possible exposure vectors, the children could be moved or harmed. Moving immediately meant going in with partial suspect identification and no interior knowledge of the warehouse layout. The task force chose speed. Put yourself in the position of the agents making that call at 10 p.m. on June 2nd, 2026. You have 9 children whose location you believe you've identified. You have a signed warrant. You have partial suspect information. You have no floor plan for the interior beyond what surveillance photography has provided. And you have no way of knowing whether anyone inside that building is armed. The decision to move the following morning at first light was documented as a joint operational call between IRS-CI Supervisory Agent Marcus Webb and HSI Assistant Special Agent in charge, Patricia Guzman. The briefing was conducted at 11:30 p.m. on June 2nd. 18 agents, 4 entry teams, 1 aerial unit, 1 medical response team staged 2 blocks away, 0 margin for error. At 6:14 a.m. on June 3, 2026, the convoy reached West Dobbins Road. At 6:19 a.m., Team 1 reached the loading dock. At 6:20 a.m., simultaneous entry. The rolling steel door on the west face was breached with a pneumatic ram. The rear metal door was opened with a bolt cutter, the padlock confirmed through surveillance as standard commercial grade, not reinforced. Inside, a functional construction supply staging area in the front third of the building. Pallets of drywall screws, 2 gas-powered generators, a workbench with tools. At 6:22 a.m., Team 2 reached the interior drywall partition. It ran floor to ceiling across the rear 2/3 of the building, with a single framed door secured with 2 external barrel bolts. The bolts were on the outside. Agent Rivas documented in his after-action report, the partition door was secured from the exterior only. The space behind it could only be opened from outside. The occupants, if any, had no ability to exit independently. At 6:22 a.m. and 34 seconds, the bolts were pulled. The door opened into a space approximately 40 feet by 60 feet. The space contained 9 folding cots, 2 portable chemical toilets, 2 propane space heaters that had been running, cases of bottled water, and boxes of packaged food. 9 children, ages 6 through 14, all alive. None were physically restrained at the moment of entry. 4 were asleep. 2 were sitting together near one of the space heaters. 3 were standing near the far wall. The youngest, 6 years old, had been in the space since January 22nd, 2026, 132 days. The medical team was on site within 3 minutes of the door opening. At the time of entry, 4 suspects were located inside the building. 2 were in the supply staging area at the front, 1 asleep in a folding chair near the loading dock, 1 on a phone call that ended abruptly when the steel door came down. 2 were in the rear partition space, present with the children. All 4 were taken into custody without resistance. The 5th suspect, identified in court documents as the operational coordinator of the cell, was not at the warehouse. At 7:04 a.m., while agents were processing the warehouse scene, a separate HSI team was executing a second operation at Sky Harbor International Airport, Terminal 4, Gate B-22. The 5th suspect had a ticket on a flight departing at 7:45 a.m. from Mexico City. He had cleared security at 6:51 a.m., 9 minutes before agents reached the gate. He was apprehended at the gate, in the jetway, before boarding. The aircraft was delayed 11 minutes. Going through the investigative timeline, one thing keeps standing out. There was no single dramatic moment of deduction that broke this case. No informant, no undercover operation, no confidential source. The case was built from a compliance packet that almost sat unread in a FinCEN queue, cross-referenced by an analyst who happened to have access to the right databases and happened to have the background to recognize what she was looking at. The algorithm flagged it. One person read the flag. One manual database query connected 2 separate reports. One reused phone number provided the evidentiary link for the warrant. Remove any one of those elements and the outcome of this case is different. Here's the take that will probably generate some pushback. The 4 families who paid a combined $340,000 in ransom and never contacted law enforcement made a rational decision given the information available to them. They had received explicit warnings about surveillance of their homes. They had been told, correctly, as it turned out, that the cell had knowledge of their routines and circumstances. And they were operating in communities where contact with federal law enforcement has historically produced outcomes that were bad for the people who made contact, not just for the criminals being reported. The ransom cell understood this. They designed their operation around it. And the policy environment that produced that fear, the enforcement posture, the documentation pressures, the institutional distrust built over decades was not created by these families. They inherited it. Whether that constitutes a systemic failure or an individual choice is a question this case does not resolve. What do you think? Did the system fail these families before the kidnapping ever started? Or is this a story about criminal exploitation that could have been interrupted if any family had made one phone call? The 5 suspects were charged in federal court in the District of Arizona on June 5, 2026. The charges included kidnapping with ransom demand, conspiracy, wire fraud, and in the case of the 2 suspects present in the partition space with the children, federal charges related to unlawful detention of minors. The 5th suspect, the operational coordinator, faced additional charges, including conspiracy to commit human smuggling, based on the connection between the Pinnacle Materials pass-through account and the HSI watch list accounts. The 4 suspects arrested at the warehouse were held without bail. The 5th, apprehended at Sky Harbor, was denied bail at a June 7th hearing after the prosecution presented documented evidence of the flight booking as indication of flight risk. All 9 children were reunited with their families within 48 hours of the warehouse operation. The 4 families were collectively owed $340,000 in ransom payments. As of the filing date, the federal government had recovered approximately $91,000 in assets linked to the scheme, roughly 27% of the total extracted. The remaining funds were not located in the Pinnacle Materials account, in the suspects' personal accounts, or in any of the Zelle recipient accounts. The task force believed a portion of the money had been moved outside the country. As of the date of indictment, those funds had not been recovered. The prosecution was ongoing. Will a ransom for silence operation targeting immigrant communities work again in the next 5 years? The answer depends on who is reading FinCEN compliance packets and whether they have access to cross-agency databases. Comment YES or no, because the infrastructure question matters more than the sentence outcome in this case. The investigation into the broader network, the human smuggling infrastructure connected to the Pinnacle Materials pass-through account, remained open as of the date of indictment. HSI identified 7 additional shell entities, potentially linked to the same financial architecture. None had been charged as of June 5, 2026. The $340,000 extracted from the 4 families represented one revenue stream. How many other revenue streams existed within the connected network? And whether the ransom operation was a standalone adaptation or a documented operational model used elsewhere in the Southwest was not established by the Phoenix Zelle investigation. If you want the follow-up on the smuggling network, what HSI found in those 7 shell entities, and where that investigation went, subscribe now. That case is already in the queue. The Levine warehouse was sealed as a federal crime scene on June 3, 2026, and remained sealed through the date of indictment. The drywall partition was documented, photographed, and preserved as evidence. The building permit that authorized its installation, filed October 2025, approved in 8 business days. No inspection required for interior non-structural partition work, remained on record with the City of Phoenix. The permit was issued by a standard automated approval process for construction modifications below a certain dollar threshold. No one reviewed it. One detail that stuck with me in the case file: the permit application listed the purpose of the partition as temperature-controlled inventory separation. The building inspector who would have reviewed it, if a review had been triggered, never saw it. The partition was built legally, permitted legally, and used to hold 9 children for up to 4 months without a single alarm. The system that was supposed to catch this didn't. The system that wasn't designed to catch this did. By the time the warrant was executed on June 3, 2026, the cell had been operating for approximately 18 months. The Phoenix operation, 4 families, 9 children, $340,000, was not necessarily the full scope of their activity. The task force documented evidence of 2 prior incidents in the Tucson area from 2025 that matched the operational signature, but could not be definitively linked to the same cell due to insufficient financial documentation. Those incidents had been reported to local police and closed as domestic disputes or voluntary missing person resolutions. No ransom payments were documented in either Tucson incident. Either the victims did not pay, the payments were made through non-Zelle channels, or the cases were not the same cell. The task force could not determine which. There is a version of this story in which the Phoenix Zelle case is the visible tip of a larger operation that extended across multiple Southwest cities and targeted dozens of families over an 18-month period. The evidence does not confirm that version. It also does not rule it out. The network, as identified, is dismantled. The demand for untraceable ransom extraction from immigrant communities, the structural condition that made this operation viable, has not been addressed by any policy or enforcement mechanism that postdates the June 3rd operation. The algorithm that caught this cell will be updated in its next quarterly release. Whether the next cell makes the same operational error, reusing one phone number, routing through one too many anchored accounts, is a question of luck and enforcement bandwidth, not systemic deterrence. 9 children were found alive in a warehouse in Levine, Arizona, on June 3, 2026. That outcome was produced by a software compliance flag, a 40-minute database query, and 1 reused prepaid phone number. The 5 men charged in connection with the operation had, by the end of their run, demonstrated that immigrant community fear of law enforcement is a reliable and exploitable asset. The families they targeted had every reason, cultural, institutional, legal, to believe that silence was their best option. 4 of them were right about everything except one thing: the algorithm. The money is largely unrecovered. The broader network remains under investigation with no indictments filed. The building permit that enabled 4 months of captivity was issued by an automated system and never reviewed. The cell is gone. The model is documented. The demand that created it is unchanged.